It's very easy, in light of what many people are going through right now, to sense a tension between our belief that while God is certainly all-powerful and is in control, kind of like we talked about last week, the evidence as we look around us may feel a bit to the contrary. And I'm sure that there are some folks that are out there who, in the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of everything that's going on in our world right now, may have drawn the conclusion that if God is in control, then maybe He just doesn't care very much. I mean, how else do you explain the pain of this planet? Like, if God is in control and God cares, then how do you explain COVID-19? And why doesn't God just do something about that? Why doesn't He just eradicate the coronavirus? And while He's at it, why not go ahead and get rid of cancer as well? How come God doesn't just eliminate all of the loneliness and the abuse, the pain and suffering in this world? If God is in control, and if God cares, then how do you explain the things in life, from little to big, that just don't go the way that we feel like they should? Where is God in all of this? And does God really care? There's a religious belief, it's called deism, that tries to explain this theology. Deism puts God in a category of kind of like a clocksmith. In other words, He built the universe like a clock. He wound it up, and now that it's running and clicking away, so to speak, He's just sitting up in heaven. He's sipping His glass of tea, and He's watching as our lives simply tick by. We're kind of like His version of Netflix. We're just here for His entertainment, and yet He's completely removed from any direct involvement or intervention. You might say that the deist position is that God doesn't actually change anything. He's wound it up, He's letting it go, and it's just going to run its course. Well, as we jump back into our brief study of the life of Job, we see some of the same tensions. Job believes in God, and Job wants to believe that God is in control. He wants to believe that God cares, and yet given his current situation and the circumstances, the evidence that's all around him seems to indicate that God is either out of control or else God just doesn't care. And so you're asking the question, well, which is it? Is He out of control, or does He just not care? Last week you saw in Job chapter 1 that Job lost pretty much everything. He lost his business. He lost his livelihood. He lost his employees, his livestock. He even lost his own children. They're all gone. And kind of like what Roger was saying in our small group on Wednesday night. Well, that's a lot of things happening, but there's a saying that comes after that, right? Well, it could be worse, right? Because Job still has his health. Well, until chapter 2. And in Job chapter 2, God gives Satan permission to test that as well. And so he afflicts Job from head to toe with really painful boils. Now, I'd never seen a boil in real life. I don't know what they look like in person, so I got on Google and Googled it, and I pulled up some pictures, and I was actually going to show you a picture, and then I decided they're really gross, and I'm not going to show you a picture. If you want to see it and you're interested, go look it up yourself. You can find it out there. There's tons of them out there. But it's a really gross thing, right? Anyway, Job chapter 2, verse 8 says this: Job scraped his skin with a piece of broken pottery as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still trying to maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." So Job's wife has seen enough here. She's seen enough pain, enough suffering, enough disappointment, enough unanswered prayer, and she's just ready to walk away from God. So she says to Job, "Look, Job, it's pretty obvious that God just doesn't care about you. So why do you care about Him? Just give up. Just curse Him and die." And this brings us to the question that I want us to wrestle with today. Last week we talked about God's power, God's strength, that He is fully in control, that God's hand is on the dial. And so the question I want us to think about today is this: God may be in control, but is God tender? Is God kind? Does He even care about what's going on in the world around us? And more specifically, does God care about me? Does He care about what's happening in my life right now? Is God thoughtful? Well, in Job chapters 38 to 40, we saw last week that God asks Job a series of questions. And if you remember, he starts off by asking Job some very large, grand questions about the universe, right? Job, where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Because, I don't remember seeing you. Can you tell us how many snowflakes are going to fall to the ground this year? Are you able to move the constellations in the sky, Job? Why don't you tell us about that? Is that you? Did you do that? Does the dawn begin at your word, Job? And it becomes abundantly clear through these series of questions that God asks about the grandeur of the universe that God is the one who has his hand on the dial, that God is the one who is in control, complete control. The order, the structure, the function of the universe is God's design. It is his handiwork. It was created by him and for him, and without him, all things would cease to be. But then as you get down into Job 38 verse 41, God begins to transition from the grandeur of the universe, and he brings it in a little closer, and he goes from astronomy to biology. He goes from talking about the expanse of the universe to caring for a baby bird. Check it out, verse 41. Who provides food for the ravens when their young cry out to God and wander about in hunger? Into chapter 39. Do you know when the wild goats give birth? Have you watched as the deer are born in the wild? Do you know how many months they carry their young? Are you aware of the time of their delivery? And I want you to notice how we're starting to see a picture of God that is more tender. He says to Job, hey, did you give the horse his strength? Did you clothe his neck with a flowing mane? Does the hawk fly by your wisdom, Job? Does he spread his wings towards the south because of what you're doing? Tell me, Job, does the eagle soar at your command and build his nest on high where he can detect food from afar? Were you the one responsible for all of that, Job? Can you see how God is pointing out these different animals in the animal kingdom? And he's calling attention to the fact that he is the one, God is the one who protects and provides and cares for them. In other words, God is not just some cosmic controller of the universe. He is a caring creator who delights in his creation and is thoughtful in his provision. So Job listens as God speaks of the ravens who are hungry, as God speaks of the beauty and the strength of a horse, as God speaks of the incredible eyesight of an eagle. And there's something comforting about this series of questions. Think about this. Did you know that an eagle, for example, has eyesight that is 4 times sharper than yours and mine? An eagle has what they call dual focus vision, which is very different than what we've got. We've got peripheral vision. We can kind of see to the side, but an eagle has dual focus vision, which means that it can see in front of it, and it can see beside of it, and it can do both at the same time. It always knows what's going on around it. Now, I got to tell this. Bill and I got one day where we actually caught some fish on our trip, and we were going from one lake to the next, and I had them on a stringer, was pulling them behind the canoe, and we're paddling from this lake to our lake, and as we're paddling along, I just happened to look up, and flying and circling low above us was a bald eagle spying my 3 fish, Bill's 3 feet, caught most of them, spying Bill's fish behind our stringer, right? It's amazing what they can see. Now, why does God give the eagle such incredible vision? It shows us that God intentionally and purposefully designed these different intricacies in His creation to make sure that His creation is provided for and cared for. And Job understood that one of the ways that we can understand God is simply to ask the animals. You say, well, preacher, that sounds a little crazy. It might. But listen to the poetry of Job's response to one of his friends. Some friends came to kind of console Job when he was going through all this. And so in Job chapter 12, this is from the Message translation, it says this. Job is responding back to Zophar, I think is who he was talking to there. He says, but ask the animals what they think. Let them teach you. Let the birds tell you what's going on. Put your ear to the earth. Learn the basics. Listen, the fish in the ocean will tell you their stories. Isn't it clear that they all know and agree that God is sovereign, that He holds all things in His hands? Isn't it true That when you look around at creation, as you listen to the stories of the animals, don't all the stories agree that God is sovereign, that He holds everything in His hand? You say, well, preacher, I'm just not sure about that. Well, all right. How about maybe for this morning, we do something a little different, and let's just interview some animals about their Creator. Say, okay, so how about the woodpecker? We could ask the woodpecker, right? When a woodpecker is hammering against a tree, its head is going about 15 times a second, literally twice the speed of a bullet. And theoretically, the woodpecker's head is moving so fast that it should kill itself. It should literally die. However, God has created this bird with a very special shock absorber between its brain and its beak. It is so unique that engineers have yet to come up with anything as good or that even closely resembles what's going on in a woodpecker's head. And what it does is it allows the woodpecker now to be cared for so that it can find the food that it needs, to create a resting place that it needs. So talk to the woodpecker. He knows that God cares. We could ask the honeybees. Honeybees are the most important pollinators for flowers, for fruits, for vegetables that are out there. And without them, many of the sources that we have for food that we enjoy, they'd be gone. Have you ever considered how when a honeybee gathers up its pollen and returns back to the hive, how does it tell the other bees where the pollen is? Right? Like how does a bee give directions and say, all right, flyers, listen, you're going to go down to the end of the pasture. You see that old oak tree out there? You're going to hook a left. You go to the second garden on the right. And that's where the flowers are. They got the best pollen right now. Right? So how does that happen? How does that take place? Well, it took scientists a long time, but they think they figured it out. And what they've discovered is that a honeybee uses an intricate dance to communicate with the other bees. Now, I don't know if this is more along the lines of the hokey pokey or the Macarena. You know, I'm not sure what kind of a dance they're doing, but basically, whatever this intricate dance is that they do, it's like, okay, here's how far you're going, and this is where you're going to turn left or right, and here's where the pollen is located. It's just another example of how God has thoughtfully and creatively gone out of His way to make sure that His creation is cared for. You could check with the pigeons. Ask the pigeon. Pigeons able to fly thousands of miles to the same roosting place without any navigational challenges at all. In fact, there's quite a few species of birds with that ability. There's the Arctic tern. Arctic tern can fly 25,000 miles from one destination to another, and it never gets lost. They basically have some kind of built-in magnometer or something like that. It allows it to interpret direction and orientation based on the Earth's magnetic field. It's like a built-in GPS, so to speak, right? It never gets lost. It always knows where it's going. Take the dragonfly. I read just a couple of weeks ago that Sikorsky, the helicopter company, Sikorsky designed one of their helicopters using the dragonfly as a model. Not as an inspiration, but as an actual model. And I could keep going, but you get the idea here. Job 12 tells us, talk to the animals. Let the animals tell you their story. God is a creator who cares for His creation. He's got the whole world in His hands. So all of Job 39 is just that. It's God answering some of life's most difficult questions by pointing out His creation. It's just one animal after another in chapter 39. They say that you can tell a lot about an artist by their art. Well, you can tell a lot about a creator by his creation. And God's creation is not only speaking to us about the power and the strength of God, it is also conveying to us that God is thoughtful, that God is tender, that God cares. So let me acknowledge just once again, we talked about this last week. God doesn't really answer any of Job's specific questions. Even though that's what Job wanted, even though I'm sure that that's what some of us would like, right? We want to put God on the stand, we want to ask Him our toughest questions, and we want God to give us an explanation. However, the reality of all of that is this, is that God doesn't owe Job, God doesn't owe you, God doesn't owe me any explanation whatsoever. He is God. He is sovereign. He is Lord of all. His ways are higher than our ways. And who could comprehend the mind of God? And yet, God responds to Job with questions of his own that point the way and make it clear to Job, hey, look, I see, I know, and I care. And so the question for you and me today is this. Even though we don't have all the answers to our questions, do you believe God cares? Do you really believe that God cares? There's a great illustration. Think about this. Imagine you got to take your 3-year-old daughter to the doctor for shots. As a parent, you know that that's a pretty miserable situation, right? Nobody wins there. It's going to be a bad day. When shot time comes around, nobody's happy about that. Certainly not the daughter. The parents aren't either. I'm sure the doctor's not even too pleased about that. But it's got to be done. You're taking your child to get poked with needles. And there's really no good way to explain that to a 3-year-old. Try explaining to a 3-year-old why you're taking them somewhere that's going to cause them trauma and pain. Now, you could try to lay out some great big scientific explanation about what's going on there, but they're 3. Right? They're not going to get that. They're not capable of understanding what you're going to say. So how is a 3-year-old supposed to know that you still care about them when you're willingly letting this happen to them? How do you convince them that you really care? And I love this approach. You could take them over to their bed in the bedroom and show them the blankets that are laying on there. Why are those blankets there? Well, to keep me warm when I get cold. Exactly. And then you can walk into the hallway and show them what's in the closet there, the towels and the additional blankets, and why are those there? Well, so that we have them when we need them in the wintertime, and then you go into the kitchen, you open this great big pantry, and you show them all this food. Why do we have so much food in here? Well, it's so that when you're hungry and when you say, "Can I have a snack?" There's a snack. And you open up the medicine cabinet and you show them the 14 boxes of Band-Aids, because we all know that to a 3-year-old, a Band-Aid cures everything, right? Why are those Band-Aids there, right? And when you start pointing these things out one after another, everywhere you turn is evidence that you're cared for. But we forget to look. We don't take the time to see. And that's what God does for Job with these questions. And Job begins to see God's provision in ways that he never understood before. I wonder if some of that also has to do with the fact that when we first meet Job, he really wasn't in a position to have to rely on God, right? Job had everything. He's got everything taken care of. There was no pressing need in Job's life whatsoever. Everything is taken care of. No great concerns for him to fret over. Chapter 1 tells us that Job owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. I have no idea what that translates to in today's vernacular, but let me tell you, it's a whole lot. He was definitely one of the 1%ers, maybe even a 0.5%er, right? He was at the top, all the way. Every need provided for and a future well prepared for. And then suddenly, without warning, without notice, it all gets stripped away. Yesterday, everything was all mapped out for him. Today, Job faces the unknown. He's got no contingency plan. There's no emergency fund. There is no plan B. And at the end of the book, in Job chapter 42, it says this: I had only heard about you before, but now my eyes have seen you. I've seen you with my own eyes. So in Job chapter 1, Job knows about God. He's kind of heard of God. He believes in God. He's prayed to God. But then in chapter 42, you get to the end of the book, he says, but now my eyes have seen you. What changed? What made the difference there? Could it have been that Job now sees his need for God? And when Job begins to see his need for God, he begins to see God. When everything around him gets stripped away, he starts to see God in a way that he had never seen him before. We live in a pretty bountiful country. And, I looking around the room, and we got different economic and social statuses here, and different income levels, and I get it. And some of you may be higher, some of you may be lower, and some of you might be in the middle. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody in this room went to bed hungry last night. I don't think anybody slept outside with no covering over their head. And I think everybody got up and put on a clean set of clothes before they came in here this morning, right? We have an abundance of blessing around us. Do you need God? Do you need God? Well, before we go, I want to tell you one more animal. It's called the golden plover. Every year, this bird, it's a small bird, flies from Alaska to Hawaii over the Pacific Ocean. So there's no place to rest. Once it starts, it has to get to the end, or it swims with the fishes, right? It's a 2,500-mile journey, nonstop flight. Takes an average of 88 hours to complete. During the course of that flight, the golden plover will flap its wings some 250,000 times consecutively. Now, scientists have determined that on average, these birds only have enough fat stored up in their body to be used as fuel to make it 81% of the way. How they got to 81%, I don't know. It's over my head, but that's what the research said that I was reading. 81% of the way where? So, on paper, the journey is impossible. You can't get there from here, as the saying goes. That they should crash and die in the sea 500 miles before they ever get to Hawaii. And yet we know they make it. We know they get there because they're there. Every year they show up. So take some time to think about the God of the golden plover. Because I'm sure some of you are probably tired. And you're probably struggling with thoughts of, man, I'm 81% of the way through and I just don't feel like I can make it. I know that I can't see land from here. How am I going to get there? How am I supposed to get there? And you've done the math. And you say, preacher, it just doesn't make sense. Every day you wake up and you try to keep going, but you're exhausted. And maybe at first when all this mess started, you thought, what, I can do this. I can get through this. And then weeks turn into months. And for a few weeks, you probably did make it. But as things have stretched on and on and on, now maybe it feels like it's just too far. It's just taken too long. I mean, when we're going to get back to the way things were? And you honestly just don't know how much longer you can last. It's at that point, my friends, where you will meet God. In the midst of your need, when you're weak and you can't go any farther, you have an opportunity to meet God in a way that you've never met Him before. Sure, you've always heard about God. Yeah, you've always known of Him. But now, in your need, you can see Him. All those Bible stories you learned as a child, they didn't mean all that much until now. There's something about being in real need that allows us to see God. Of course, if we're honest, none of us really want that, right? We don't want to be in that situation of need, do we? We kind of like living in a way where, God is nice, but He's not really necessary. I don't mind coming to church now and then and just checking in once in a while. Sure, I'll make sure I'm here on Christmas and Easter and maybe homecoming. But I do believe in God and I think He's nice and all of that. But I don't want to have to depend on Him. I don't want to have to rely on Him. And so we try to arrange our schedules and our futures and our lives. And we save our money in such a way that we do everything we can to make God unnecessary. And the problem with that approach is that most of us don't truly see God until we recognize and realize how necessary He really is. If we don't recognize our need, then it's really hard to depend on God. Jesus teaches us to pray, give us this day our what? Daily bread. Isn't that the lesson that He taught in the wilderness? When He provided the manna? One day at a time. One day at a time. Not a stockpile, not a month's worth, not 90 days of supplies in case it all hits the fan. No. Give us this day our daily bread. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you actually prayed a prayer like that? Not as poetry, not as a recitation because the preacher said, why don't we all say the Lord's Prayer today? But when was the last time that you genuinely, out of necessity, prayed that prayer? Lord, give me today my daily bread. And I'm going to be honest. I can't remember that I've ever done that. I can't remember that I've ever done that. God says to us, hey, don't be anxious about anything, but make your prayers, your requests known to me. Well, that sounds like a nice invitation, but you know what, God? Hey, doctor gave me a new prescription. It's going to take care of everything. So I think I'm good right now. God says, I will meet all of your needs. Well, thanks, Lord, but I've got this great job, and it's got really good benefits and excellent insurance. They even got a matching 401k. My future, it's set. It's prepared for. Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest. Well, if you mean by rest, that's a day at the spa or an afternoon at the lake. Great, because that's what I could really use right now, Lord. The Bible instructs us to cast all your burdens on the Lord, and He will sustain you. Well, that's a nice thought, Lord, but I've found that some Pilates and a glass of wine before bed seems to do a pretty good job as well. And what we do is we fill our lives with all of these comforts and all of these supports and our insurance and our medical cards and everything that we need, making sure that everything gets taken care of, and we miss an opportunity to see God. Because God goes from being nice to being necessary when we recognize our need for Him. And here's the problem. Jesus spent 3 years in ministry, and He was always jumping on the Pharisees. Why? Because the Pharisees had their 401ks, and they had their medical cards, and they had their futures and their securities and all of their things. And the Pharisees never saw their need. And yet, the crowds and the people that flocked to Jesus, that were willing to say, God, I don't know how I'm going to get through today. When they came and said, I have a real need here, they saw God. So what about us? You want to find out what God looks like? You want to see God? Go to a place where people recognize they're in desperate need of Him. And my prayer is that that place would be here. That we, you, me, us, would recognize our desperate need of God. Go somewhere where they cry out for Him, and that's where you'll find Him. David tells us in Psalm 34, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He's close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed. 1 Peter chapter 5, give all your worries, all your cares to God, for He cares about you. Do you believe that? Do you believe that God is more than just a cosmic controller, that He's also the caring creator and He cares for you? Have a conversation with a woodpecker or a pigeon. Ask the golden plover. They'll all be glad to tell you their stories. Because God has the world in His hands. He's in control. And more than that, He cares. He cares about you. He cares about me. And if you ever say, well, that's fine, you're talking about a bunch of animals. How about we get really real? Because the greatest demonstration of God's love and His care was seen at a cross 2,000 years ago, where God punished His own Son for the sins that you committed, for the sins that I've committed, for your sins and my sins. For while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And that, dear church, is all the evidence that we need. That no matter how out of control life seems to get around us, no matter how much we might wonder or feel, God cares for me. God cares for you. God cares for us. Let's pray. God, we want to thank you for your care. Lord, you've demonstrated over and over and over through your word as we just go out and look at the stars in the sky. Just take a look at things around us and see your hand in all that you've made. God, as we move from astronomy to biology, and next week we're going to bring it even closer, Lord, may we just trust you. And God, I pray that even in the abundance that you have blessed us with so much, we would still recognize and submit to our need for you. We need you. God, I need you. Open my eyes that I may see you. Move and work in the lives of your people. Use this congregation to bless others. Father, work through us. And may we never have a shadow of a doubt that you are in control and that you care. In Jesus' name, we pray this. Amen.